Welcome to today's Academy Live webcast titled Hour 13 of 24 Hours Have Passed with SQL Denali Engineers Fireside Chat, hosted by Chuck Heinzelman and Laura Robelke. Chuck, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you everyone who's attending for coming to the end of the first day of 24 Hours Have Passed. A great opportunity to engage with the Microsoft engineers that are working on the product that we're coming out with. The first thing I'd like to do is introduce myself and my cohort Laura. My name is Chuck Heinzelman. I am a senior program manager with Microsoft working on the community team of the customer experience team. And over to Laura.
Hi, this is Laura Robelke, and I also am on the team with Chuck, and I'm a program manager. Thank you.
All right, I'd like to just take a minute or two here to introduce the people from Microsoft's engineering team that we have on the line and talk about and just tell you what their specialties are. From the SSIS team, we have three people: Matthew Roach, Wei Shong Tok, and Rakesh Parida. From the SSAS team, we have Ashvini Sharma and Roman Iyer. Representing Always On, we have Kevin Farley. Representing the Query Processor and Resource Governor, Boris Barishnikov. And for extended events, Mike Wackel. Now, you do have, as an attendee, live audio. If you would like to just ask a question, go ahead and we can have two-way interaction, or you can ask your questions through the Q&A panel. And since we have one in the Q&A panel, why don't we start with that? The question is from Will Sisney, Hand SQL, and I love the Twitter handle, by the way. The question is, can we please have a database script-only backup option in Denali? Now, do we have anyone from Microsoft on the line that wants to address that one?
That would be me. This is Kevin. Among other things, I own backup. So the classic backup is a binary-only stream, which is what makes it fast. You have the option in SSMS to script the database out, and in fact, that's how I was able to transfer one of my own databases from my local instance up into SQL Azure. We are working on a utility that'll be an optimized version of that, which will be a lot more efficient than what's there currently. I'm not sure what the ship vehicle is going to be. It won't be part of Denali, but it won't wait until the next major release, so it'll come out somewhere in between. It'll be mostly, it's implemented as a way to get data back and forth between SQL Azure and the Box product, but again, its function is to do a logical backup of databases. Is that going to meet what you need?
It doesn't look like Will is coming back online to answer. Do we have any other questions coming in? Anyone on the meeting that wants to ask a question? Well, if no one's going to ask a question, I'm going to have to start asking questions here. So, hearing no one else, I'm going to pose another question to Mr. Farley. What can you tell us about what you've done with secondaries in SQL Server Denali?
So, with the Always On program, one of the major distinctions between the database mirroring implementation and Always On is what we're calling active secondaries. With active secondaries, you can actually make use of the secondary hardware that has previously been just sitting there for disaster recovery as a failover target. We now allow you to do interesting work on those secondaries while the primary is going on. You can access the secondary in read-only mode to do queries. My part of the world has been enabling backups to be done on your secondary. So previously, in a database mirroring environment, you could only do backups on your primary, and if you had a backup job on your secondary, it would just fail. Now you can do backups either on your primary, as always, or on your secondary. So you can offload that work from your primary and make use of that hardware. Any questions on how that works, ins and outs?
It does look like we have another question or two in the queue. The first question is, with the push for Vertipack, how are the existing SSAS development models going to be reused? Is there someone who can answer that question for us?
This is Ashwini. Can you hear me?
Sure.
Okay, great. So in Denali, one of the concepts we're introducing is the notion of a BI semantic model. BI semantic model is a model that provides a consistent experience to your clients, whether it's Excel, whether it's reporting services, any of your BI clients. And it has multiple ways of building. Denali provides multiple ways of building a BI semantic model. One of those ways is through the multidimensional projects. This is exactly what you're used to today with analysis services. And anyone that's used analysis services, once you get Denali, you just continue to do the same thing and you end up with a BI semantic model. Another way of building BI semantic model is through a tabular project, which are just more relational in nature. So the concepts you're dealing with there are tables and relationships instead of dimensions and measure groups. So it's it's an easier way of building your models. Now, given these two, just to underscore, is how you build it, your clients can consume it in the same way. Now, the question was, with the new push for Vertipack, how are existing SSAS developments or models going to be reused? For Denali, you can continue to develop your models the way you've been building them so far. There's no changes required for that. If you want to use Vertipack, then you would build tabular models using the tabular projects. Now, the pros and cons of these two are slightly different. Multidimensional is still the way to go for more complex BI types of applications, or financial applications. So if you want to have complex formulas, if you want to do custom rollups or unary operators, if you want to use data mining, if you want to use more advanced features, very, very high scale, if you have multi-terabytes of data that you want to load on a server, then you want to stick with multidimensional. If instead your goal is quick time to solution, your databases, your data set would primarily fit in memory. If your calculation demands are not as complex as what multidimensional provides, then tabular would be a way to go. So that's the way we think about Denali. You can continue to use what you have. There are new opportunities, new choices available to you to use as well. Okay, that's it. Any questions on that one?
All right, not hearing any follow-ups on that. I'd like to thank you for that one. We have a question in the queue about licensing. We do not have those decisions at our disposal. That's going to be, coming out. I don't know when it's going to be coming out, but it will be in the future. And this being an engineering discussion, we don't have those answers. So just to let you know, we are not avoiding your question. It's just we don't have those answers. The next one is, this one's going to be coming to Boris, actually, because one was retracted, and I don't remember exactly what it was. The question is there any major changes taking place in terms of memory management in SQL Denali?
Boris, you might be on mute.
Okay. so do you hear me now?
Absolutely.
We sure do, thank you.
Okay, it just takes a few seconds before it unmutes. That's why there are pauses like this. So yes, in short, there's a new memory model for SQL Server Denali, and sort of externally, it's not really visible, with one exception that things like SP configure max server memory is now controlling the full amount of memory allocated to SQL Server. So that's a difference from what it was like before. So for example, before SP configure max server memory was controlling only the buffer pool size, and there are things like CLR allocated memory and other things that could be loaded in the process space of SQL Server.exe that were not controlled by this. So now this is changing. So yes, that has a potential impact of tighter control in terms of the resource allocation for the multiple instances running on the same machine, on the same box. And there are also some internal changes like types of memory allocation. So you will see the changes in the DMVs, and we should have those changes described in books online. So if you go and query sys.os memory related DMVs, you will see that the changes are there in terms of how we track the memory and how we display how much memory is allocated. So I hope that answers the question. So you have the floor.
All right. Do we have anyone on the line that feels comfortable talking about replication? Hearing none, I'm going to, this is for Brandon Williams. I'm going to copy down your question and, just have it and see if we can, if someone else joins along the way, we'll see if anyone can answer that one for you. What I do want to throw to right now is, Mike, can you tell us anything about some of the DMVs that are coming out in Denali?
Well, I can't tell you too much about them other than I posted to the Q&A window a link to one of the blogs from the SQL OS team that lists out a handful of the new DMVs that are coming out. And I did a search internally here and found that eventually we should be releasing some books online documentation that will list them. So I remember the question was, is there anything exciting? So I don't know how exciting they are. But there's some updates to DM query, exec query stats, some OS volume stats. There's not a huge list, only about 5 or 6.
And there's a whole list of new DMVs relating to the always-on infrastructure to let you find out what the state of all the different entities in that area is. So
that is true, and those are, of course, very exciting.
They are to me.
Me too.
Okay, it looks like we've got another one in the queue. Are there any new features or changes revolving around pivot and unpivot in the plans for Denali? Is there anybody that can speak to that? That might be another gap in our panel today, but we can also take that question down. Chuck, do you have that?
Yep, and just to let everyone know, we are kind of split between today and tomorrow. We're trying to keep the people in the session aligned with the 12 sessions that were part of the 24 hours of past. So if you don't see someone here that can answer your question today, you might want to join tomorrow's session at the same time, where we'll have a whole another group of speakers.
Sounds good, thanks.
So we haven't had many questions for the SSIS folks yet. Does someone from the SSIS team want to talk about some of the new features that are coming down the road in Denali from the SSIS standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely, Chuck. This is Matthew Roach, Program Manager on the SSIS team. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. And in my opinion, this is one of the biggest releases that SSIS has ever had, certainly the biggest one since 2005. So at some point, you'll have to ask me to be quiet. I'll keep an eye on the Q&A pane and try to be respectful of the other questions coming in. To focus on one specific thing, one of the biggest features or feature areas in the Denali release for integration services is the new server deployment model and execution model. So in previous versions of integration services, the unit of deployment and execution, or I guess development, deployment, and execution has been the package, even though in Visual Studio, an SSIS developer has had the concept of a project. That project has only been a Visual Studio concept. It hasn't been part of the runtime, and for the most part, once you deploy your packages and start working with them in production, the package is the only meaningful unit to describe what's going on. In Denali, not only do we have an improved developer experience, improved debugging and troubleshooting experience, we also have an actual server where there is an SSIS catalog, which is implemented in the relational database engine, a Transact SQL and managed API for execution and monitoring and management, and we have the ability to make the project a first-class citizen or first-class concept after deployment as well. So when the developer is working in Visual Studio, building up their packages and doing all their testing, they can add projects, they can have references between packages without there needing to be a fully qualified path between them. There are new parameters that allow you to much more easily reuse and orchestrate execution between packages. And then once it's deployed up to the server, there is both the better parity between the development and production environment, and there is a lot of infrastructure and troubleshooting, diagnostics, and monitoring support that has never existed before. So in previous versions of integration services, we would see a lot of the same functionality being implemented by developers. So logging and troubleshooting, diagnostics and debugging, a lot of SSIS developers would reinvent this wheel over and over again. Any developer who's using the new server deployment model in Denali, they get a first-class, high-performance, configurable infrastructure that they can simply take advantage of, making everybody more productive, making that common functionality just work out of the box. So as an SSIS developer for the last, I guess, 6 years or more, this is one of the things that I had developed quite a few times myself. Having it in the box is a huge win for integration services designers and developers. And I see we've got somebody else in the Q&A queue, so I will go back on mute, let you get back to the callers.
Thanks so much. So the question in the queue says, I'm using SQL Server Management Studio Denali CTP3. Do not see a launching point for bids, but saw there was a project for new development studio that included both SSMS and bids. Can we get some details on this? In other words, will it be Visual Studio or SSMS or standalone based?
So, can I take the question?
Please do.
Okay, yeah. So in Denali, right, what will happen is this. In bids, right, when you start off bids, you could new integration services project. So as Matthew was sharing earlier, you start adding your packages to this IS project in bids. Now, once that is done, right, you will build the project, right, and that will produce a single file which we call the SSIS deployment file. Now, this file itself, you can take it, it's self-contained, all the packages get put into this file. Then you will be able to make use of different options in order to deploy it to what we call the SSIS catalog, which is a user database in SQL Server. Right. So once you have this project, you deploy it to the SSIS catalog, you will start executing it, managing it, or configuring it using the management studio. So does that answer your question, Kevin?
Yes, it does. I just seen you had another project. I think it was Juno or something. It was one of those. that said it was a developer tool, so I was just wondering while we were on SSIS what that was.
Yeah. So in Bits itself or in Juno, right? When you start off the development environment, you should still be able to find a section that says Integration Services Project, and that's when you start developing IS project. But yeah, you could make use of Juno to do the database project and related stuff. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, so we're out of questions in our Q&A pane. Is there anyone on the meeting that wants to ask about a question? Well, hearing no one, I'm going to ask something that I'm interested in. Boris, we've been a little light on the query processor in general tonight so far. I'm sure there's some interesting stuff going on there. Anything you want to share with us?
And if you can, I'm actually pretty interested to understand what are some of the things that we should be watching for from a performance perspective or analysis perspective when it comes to Apollo and query plans, etc.
Certainly. So this is.
If you know anything about that, that'd be great.
I hope you can hear me all right now. So yes, one of the new features that we're introducing in Denali is the so-called column store. So this is the extremely fast way of processing queries that are data warehouse decision support related queries natively inside of the engine. And it uses the technology that allows us to actually process only the columns you're referencing in the query, and we actually store the data in the way, not in the traditional RDBMS way, as in we store the rows, but we store the columns. And as you probably know, in the data warehousing, in the decision support space, the dimensions are usually slowly changing, so that allows us to achieve extremely high compression rates, and as a result, we do not have to move as much data back and forth. So that allows us to achieve appropriate performance gains when you're able to use the column store index. So few benefits I should mention about this new feature. So this is relatively, it is transparent from the point of view of the queries. So if you have the column store index, and if you able to use that column store index based on the query, which is the query processor or SQL Server engine determines, then you'll gain the benefit. And you have gradual degradation if, for example, for some reasons you're referring to the tables that are not the column store tables, or they do not have indexes like that, or for some other reasons we are unable to use them. So you will not have to write specific queries for the column store. Yes, you'll have to create and maintain those indices, and you have to be aware of the cases when you have to write the queries that will be able to use those column store indices. So those things are still there. But as far as the things to try, this is one of the brand new things in the Denali. And I encourage you to download CTP3 and just try it out. Get the white paper on the Denali. There's a brief white paper on the Microsoft.com site. And you can just see the performance for yourself. So yes, it is a memory-hungry feature, so you need a relatively memory-capable machine in order to see the best of the performance benefits of performance gains. So that's my brief introduction into column store. So Larry, you have the floor.
Thanks, and we have a couple more questions that came in the queue. Again, I'm not sure if we have people that are on the line tonight to cover full text search, but is there anybody that's comfortable talking to the question, has full text search been improved or enhanced? Nope. I think we are going to have to queue that up for perhaps tomorrow or answer it offline as well. And as far as the next question, are there any plans to support temporal data types in SSAS in Denali? Teradata 13.10 backend specifically for us. Any of our analysis services people, can you speak to the support of temporal data types in SSAS?
Yeah, this is Ashwini again. We don't have any plans right now for temporal data types. I'm assuming you're looking at temporal aggregations, looking at windowed aggregations. Is that, just to get some clarification, maybe if you can describe what the scenario is for there?
Gary, are you able to unmute yourself and provide some additional details? Unfortunately not, he said. Okay. It doesn't sound like we're going to be able to get any more details of what he might be looking for.
Okay. Yeah, so if I think I know what you're referring to, there are no plans right now of providing that. In the current release, in the future, we're always open to more feedback. So maybe if you can send us mail, do they have an email address that they can send feedback to? Perhaps if you could send that to us, Gary, then I'd love to listen to what scenarios you've got.
Gary, if you want to just put that in the Q&A panel, or send Chuck or myself a private chat, we'll make sure and get that email.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, he'll provide it through Denali. There you go.
And from working with Denny, I'll tell you, if he hears it from you, we'll hear it from him. Denny is a great guy. I'm happy that you're working with him on this kind of stuff. All right. We haven't talked a whole lot about extended events here, and we've got a guy on the line here that knows extended events pretty well. So, Mike, do you want to just give us a little bit of a primer on some of the things that are happening with extended events in SQL Server Denali?
Sure, no problem. It's actually a pretty exciting release for extended events, mostly because we actually did a version 2, which doesn't happen that often, so we're excited to be there. Our main focus for Denali was to take the system that we started off in SQL Server 2008 and make it just a little bit more usable for people. And how we did that was by creating a user interface. So if you go and get CTP3, you're going to see our new user interface in its full glory. We've tried to take all of the things that people liked about SQL Profiler and leave behind all of the stuff that people didn't like about SQL Profiler and come up with this new UI. So you can go into Management Studio. It's all integrated directly into Management Studio. There's a new node for us underneath the manageability node called Extended Events, quite appropriately. And from there, you'll be able to see any sessions that you have running. And if you right-click on the session icon, you'll be able to start new sessions in a couple different ways. I'll let you explore that, and actually into the Q&A tab in a moment, I will post the link to our team's blog about where you can find all kinds of blog posts about what's going on with the new UI and get a walkthrough of that. Beyond that, we've actually taken the extended event system in Denali and basically brought it up to what I call data parity with SQL Trace. So that means that, you know, you're not going to find a one-to-one mapping from event names or column names, but if you could get the data in SQL Trace regarding diagnostic tracing, you can now in Denali get that exact same data from the extended event system. So anything you could get before, you can get now, and that really helps us move another step towards moving our diagnostic tracing story completely over to extended events. So everything you want to do, you can do in Trace. When you get the blog post link, you'll be able to find that I have a post that covers all the information you'll want to know about how to migrate from SQL Trace to extended events. And then finally, just going back to our UI, the other part of the UI, besides being able to configure new event sessions, which obviously is really important, is the ability to look at what's going on in your event session. So in Management Studio, you'll also find the ability to both open up XEL files. XEL is the file extension that we use for our trace format that Extended Events puts out, but you'll also be able to view a session that's running live. So I call that the scrolly window. That's the thing you see in Profiler where you can just start up a trace and it starts scrolling the data by. The great benefit of Extended Events here is that unlike SQL Profiler, when you started up that live response to trace, it had a tendency to have a significant impact on the performance of your production server, to the point that people tended not to do that. In extended events, we don't have that same type of performance impact. So you can actually just start that up, and generally we find that we have a very low profile and performance impact. We're very scalable. You can see the data scroll right by, and the UI has a lot of additional functionality that you didn't have in Profiler, in terms of being able to do stuff like filtering, bookmarking, adding grouping to the data that you see in the tab, doing some aggregation. So you could say group on the SQL statement, and then you could do an aggregation by the CPU duration, and then you could sort that aggregation. You could very quickly, just within the UI that we give you in Management Studio, find the query that is running, the longest, and then start digging into why you can do that. There's a bunch of other stuff available. We've created some new programmatic interfaces, and all kinds of neat stuff like that. That's all on the blog, and I will post that link into the Q&A tab. Those are the highlights.
All right, thank you for that overview. I knew there was some great stuff that happening there, and yeah, what you just said proves it. So, we've got a real lively crowd here. Anyone else have some questions for this team? We've got some pretty good minds in SSIS, SSAS, and in the engine itself. Because if you don't ask them, I'm going to keep asking. All right.
I actually have a question, Chuck, if that's okay, related to Always On. There's a limit to the number of secondaries that you can have. Is that true, Kevin?
There is a limit, but it's fairly large, and I'm not remembering what it is offhand. We've done some tests in the double digits easily. It's not significantly above that.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, we've got some stuff rolling in here. The first one I'm going to throw out there is, to what extent is SSIS becoming contained in the database engine with the introduction of the SSIS config database?
Hi, this is Rakesh here from the SSIS team. So let me get that question again. So the question is about SSIS becoming contained in the database engine. So this is distinct feedback that we had from customers around managing SSIS packages with respect to deployment, execution, and stuff. So the conscious design decision that we have taken is to encapsulate SSIS within the database engine and have the single point of view with respect to management, so that the users have the seamless experience of executing the packages, managing those packages, looking at execution reports, and so the SSIS packages as a whole reside on the database engine. But I'm not sure if this question is towards the contained database thing that we are coming up with Denali. So this is different than the contained database thing. And so what so the SSIS being on the database engine now is you can execute packages on a server, and you can manage and use the reporting services on the server to check on the SSIS executions.
Yeah, and just this is Matthew from the SSAS team again as well. So since Denali does have that concept of a contained database, just to make sure that we're answering the question that's being asked, when I read this question, the way that I'm interpreting it is integration services going to be part of the relational engine? And to take Rakesh's answer and to run with it, from a deployment and management perspective, yes, we've got the SSIS-DB database, which contains both the packages that are deployed in that new project model, as well as all sorts of metadata and runtime information for reporting and management. But from an execution perspective, the execution is going to continue to be an external host process the execution is not going to be part of the SQL Server EXE. So hopefully that answers the question that Data Dowser is asking. And if not, just give us a shout and we'll answer the right question.
All right, thank you very much for that one. We also have one about, since we're on the topic of containment and we brought up contained databases, the question is, can contained databases work with Windows logins or only with SQL Server logins? I don't know, Kevin, is this one that you can address?
A little outside my area.
Okay, I will take that one down as a note for a question to answer offline. And while this has been going on, I've talked to some of the people that have been putting this Fireside Chat on. And what we're going to do with these questions is we're going to come up with some sort of, probably a blog post to answer these additional questions and then publicize that via Twitter. So watch the SQL Server Twitter account for information on when this stuff gets published. We have a question about, is there any improved SharePoint integration? Since we have a lot of, or a few SSAS people on the line, do you guys want to address the SharePoint integration with SSAS, and maybe, you know, if you want to, if you can touch on RS a little bit?
Sure. So Ashwini again. So for analysis services, our SharePoint integration is, there are various points where we integrate with SharePoint. One of them is Power Pivot for SharePoint, which is coming out of the analysis services team. Power Pivot for SharePoint allows users to upload workbooks that they create with Power Pivot for Excel, and they get some rich functionality within SharePoint. So you get some Silverlight views to look at your workbooks. You have the ability to automatically refresh your workbooks on a schedule. So you can say, every Monday morning, schedule this, or once a day, schedule my workbook, so I don't have to do it on my desktop and upload it to SharePoint. You also, if you're in IT, you get the oversight. You get to see who's using what workbooks, where does the data in those workbooks come from, what's the server health, you know, how many queries are running less than 3 seconds, between 3 seconds, 5 seconds, etc., how much memory is being used, etc. So it's a whole managed system for providing self-service for end users. Now, Crescent is fits in that umbrella. So Crescent integrates with SharePoint, and once you have deployed the Denali version of SQL Server, you get a you can of course upload your Power Pivot workbooks, and you get all the functionality I mentioned. In addition, you also get the Crescent experience. Crescent is a new Silverlight-based tool that we're releasing with Denali, and it's targeted at end user. Ad hoc exploration of data by end users. So it's a fairly visual way and fairly responsive way of exploring your data. Crescent can connect to any Power Pivot workbook. You can also connect to a BI semantic model that's running outside the SharePoint farm. So you can register your servers that way as well. So I think that would be the SharePoint integration with analysis services in a nutshell. But I'm not going into, because SharePoint itself provides a lot of features which connect to analysis services out of the box. So Excel services connect to analysis services, for example, and those are the native features that come out of the SharePoint team for connecting to analysis services that's running.
And I do know that with the CTP3 bits, there were some changes to how reporting services is integrated into SharePoint as well. I personally had set that up under 2008 R2, and I'll tell you, the experience with the RS SharePoint integration is it's come leaps and bounds beyond what it was in R2.
But I can't speak about the RS, but that same statement is also true for Power Pivot, where the setup and configuration aspect of Power Pivot for SharePoint wasn't something we were very proud of in a previous release. And in Denali, we've provided a separate config tool, and we've separated out install, which is just laying down the bits on the machine, from configuration, which activates those bits and lights up the Power Pivot functionality. And it's much more robust. It's scriptable completely, so you can have PowerShell scripts that deploy this functionality as well. The whole system is a lot more robust now with that, and I'm sure that is true for reporting services as well.
Thank you very much for that information.
Sure.
All right, it looks like we have another question. Again, I'm not sure if we have somebody on the panel to cover this, but we'll float it out there anyway. Are there any improvements to change data capture in terms of querying changes and performance overhead? All right, again, that might be one that we'll have to best cover either tomorrow or in a follow-up blog.
I've got it on the list of things to cover in the future.
Thank you. Any other questions? People want to chime in live, or?
So one topic that we've got on the screen that we haven't touched on at all yet is Resource Governor. So Boris, if you wouldn't mind coming back online and just giving us a little bit of overview of any changes in Resource Governor that we can look forward to.
The story for SQL Server Denali is that the functional surface of the Resource Governor did not change. So you pretty much have the same set of features as it was originally introduced in 2008. So in that sense, you will have roughly the same set of controls, roughly the same set of behaviors. Now, what has changed, and that's back to the very first question that I asked, because we changed the memory model, and now the accounting of the memory spent by various user queries that are accounted as part of the Resource Governor control are now tighter. So you actually have more control, you have more precise control as far as the memory allocation goes. So there are no changes for the CPU story. So as you had it before, you could change it as well today. Now for memory, some things were out of reach for the Resource Governor as far as the SQL Server 2008 or 2008 R2, which will be covered by the Resource Governors in Denali. So one example of this would be, let's say you have a CLR stored procedure that allocates lots of memory. Before, you could not control how much memory that allocation could take. Now you can have better control on those things. Now you still need to understand that CLR has a slightly different model in terms of how they allocate memory. So we do not track, because of the garbage collection model inside of the CLR itself, we cannot track every single user to its allocated data, otherwise it will be very expensive. So there's still some limitations on how CLR is controlled, but it's controlled significantly better than it was before. So that's one of the examples that were done, sort of transparent improvements to the engine itself that just provide a better story. But as I said, there are no functional differences as far as the Resource Governor in 2008 and Denali. And if you have any other questions on the 2008 itself, on the Resource Governor specifically, I'll be happy to answer that as well.
All right. Well, thank you for that overview. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Anything coming in? If not, I'm going to throw a little curveball at our engineers. First, I want to thank them all for being here. We're getting toward the end of the call here, but I want to just go down the line and do kind of a lightning round of, take 30 seconds to a minute and tell us about your favorite new thing that's coming down the road in Denali. It doesn't have to be something you worked on. It could be something you worked on. You could be plugging your own feature. But let's just go down the line. If someone still has a question, please put it in the Q&A pane, and we'll break out of this and get to your question. That's not a problem. But Matthew, why don't we start with you? A new thing in Denali that you're really excited about.
So this is actually a specific aspect of that server model that I mentioned earlier. I love the fact that in integration services for Denali, for any package that's deployed to the server, you can see for any execution of any package how many rows passed through any path in your data flow, what was input by or output from any data flow component. This is out of the box, and it's that deep, deep, deep insight, so you can do whatever type of analysis you want to do on it. We've got a bunch of built-in reports, and there's already one of our SSIS MVPs who has a CodeFlex project with his own reports based on this data. So deeper insight into what's going on in your packages without your needing to do the work for it. Saves you a ton of time, works beautifully.
All right, Wei Xiong, how about you?
Yeah, one of the favorite features that I like is what we call the execution instance specific performance information. So prior to Denali, on the box, if you want to know what are some of the performance counters, right, you really get an aggregate of all the performance information for all packages that's running, right? And there's no way in which you can zoom down to a specific execution instance. In Denali, now you have this ability to say, well, while a package is running, you can immediately connect to the package using T-SQL and find out about all this performance information. So that's my favorite feature.
All right, Rakesh.
Yeah, I'm going to actually talk about the developer experience enhancements that we made in SSIS. As Matthew and Wei Xiong have talked about the DB experiences, with respect to developers, we've already heard a lot about, we hear a lot of suggestions on how we can enhance our development experience with bids, and we had some questions about bids as well. So with the new bids that is coming out, we're going to give really good features with respect to shared development with Team Foundation server, source control systems. It will be now a nice seamless experience with much cleaner XML in our packages. We are having some nifty features like copy paste, which has been like every time we show that feature in our demos, there's like a very good response to it. And then we have several other bids enhancements to our packages. You can see them as projects, specific projects right now, things like project parameters, environments, and things like that. So I'm really excited about the developer experiences that we are introducing with Denali.
All right, Ashwini.
All right, I'm going to pick a feature that I don't work on, which is Crescent. Crescent is I was writing adjectives that I would use for describing it as the others were speaking. And the adjectives I wrote were visual, appealing, beautiful, responsive, useful, easy, wonderful, wonderful experience over your data. So if you haven't seen Crescent, it is worthwhile. So that's it, Crescent.
All right. All right, Roman?
Hi. Ashwini took Crescent, but really to me, I think it's the most exciting part of the BI work that we've done is the tabular data model that we've developed that actually supports the Crescent experience. The engine work that we've done to bring that tabular model from the Power Pivot world to the professional BI users. We scaled that up, added richer capabilities, made it enterprise ready, and that's just a simplified data model that has a lot of power, and that as you work with it, you'll realize that you can do a lot in it. Even though it's simplified, it's powerful, it's fast, and it just makes Crescent fly.
All right. Kevin, how about you?
Well, I talked a little bit about backup on secondaries earlier. Corner of that I think is pretty slick is if you think about the way you used to do things on database mirroring, a lot of people would have backup jobs running on both nodes within database mirroring, and it just expect whichever one wasn't primary to fail. Well, with always on, number one, the backups on both sides will succeed, and number two, it's not one-to-one anymore, it's one-to-many, so all the sites could succeed, which makes scripting kind of a challenge. So what we've done is we've created a set of preference settings which you can set. One of them is whether or not you want to have backups run on the primary or only on secondary, or secondary preferred primary if there's no secondary available. There's a number of settings there. And then for each replica, you can set a relative priority for whether you want it to do the backups. You may have one machine that has extra storage, so you really want the backups to happen on it. So you'll set it to 100 and the others to 5 or something. And then we have a system function which you call is preferred replica. You pass it the database name that you're interested in, and we go through all the query to digest all these preferences along with the state of each of the replicas in the cluster, and we return you a Boolean as to whether this is the right node to do the backup on that database right now. So it makes it really simple to do your scripting. All you have to do is add one line to your script. If not is preferred replica, then exit or whatever you want to do with it, and you get all the power of all those settings, and they automatically adjust where the backups happen depending on what the state of the cluster is, state of all the replicas. So I think that's pretty cool.
Sounds great. Boris, what do you have for us?
So I think one of the largest and most interesting features from our side is the column store indices, and I just responded to a question where you can find more information about the column store indices. This is a reference to the white paper that describes the technology benefits and how that mechanism works. And the most interesting or amazing part for me is probably the transparency in new execution mode, the batch mode, when we process a number of columns for a particular query, and that happens transparently to the application. So there's no need to write queries specific to the column store, and all you have to do is just create them and maintain them relative to what kind of queries you're running. We also worked on a few improvements in the engine itself, in the query processor. One of them that actually shows up not only in Denali but in the service pack of the prior release is improvement to the force seek index hint. So now you can hint queries by specifying which columns you want to seek on. So that provides you a little bit higher predictability of some queries and helps you solve some of the problems.
No, it sounds like Boris might have lost his call there. So with that, I will close out with Mike.
Did we lose Mike as well?
I think we might have. Well, it
Chuck,
looks like
I just wanted to point out there was one last question that was in the queue, and that was who's going to win the Quiz Bowl?
Well, that would be me.
No, that is definitely me. Mr. Farley, do you have a different answer?
This Mr. Farley does.
Well, with that, I think we can turn it back over to Chris to close us out.
Thank you very much, Chuck. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're seeing on your screen right now is a survey slide. Please do enter in your information as you've logged into the live meeting. You'll be taken to an active web page where you can leave feedback on how you thought today's presentation went. I want to thank Chuck and Laura for presenting today's material, and all of our engineers for presenting their aspects of SQL Server Denali. Ladies and gentlemen, this does conclude today's presentation. Thank you very much. You may now disconnect.